Hey guys, this is Gripst for Grips.com. I'm gonna do a little session today, just playing two tables, and I'm gonna not use a heads-up display. Been getting some feedback from some people saying it's tough to see the cards and that they don't really understand what all the numbers mean, and also with four tables going that it's a bit too much action to keep track of. So what I decided to do was just open up a couple games where I don't really know much about the players. We're at 1-2 no limit, and I just thought, I'd feel it out, try to get some reads on the players, and just play based on that. I know quite a few of the people who are starting out with online poker who aren't already heavy into it don't use a heads-up display, so I guess it would be beneficial for them to see how to play a session without relying on the stats given by a heads-up display. So just gonna try to feel out the game dynamics, see how everyone's playing, and yeah, try to make some money. So given that it's three-handed, Ace Nine is well ahead of this guy's opening range on the button. I don't really want to three bet because if he puts it in, I don't want to call with Ace Nine, and I hate to three bet and fold a hand with so much value. I call pre-flop because I figure I have the best hand, and on this board, he's going to be continuation betting his entire range. So if ace high was good before the flop, it's most likely still good after the flop. So I'm going to take one card off, hope he shuts down, and we can get our ace to showdown. There is no value in betting. I'm not really trying to make him fold anything. I could try to get him off a 3 or like a pair of 4s, but I think the value of bluff catching outweighs the value of trying to make him fold a slightly better hand. So, read is correct. He had 8-7 high, and we see that had we 3-bet with that hand, he would have folded pre-flop anyway. Okay, this guy has a red dot, which means he's aggressive, so I think he's going to be 3-betting me very aggressively in these positions, small blind versus big blind. Given that I have a pair of 9s, my hand is way too big to fold, but calling and playing out of position with a hand that's very unlikely to improve is a recipe for disaster. Didn't really expect him to call the 4-bet. I expected him to either put all the money in or just fold, but him calling presents an interesting scenario. I bet the flop extremely small because unless he has a king or possibly a jack, he's probably not really continuing no matter how much I bet. So I went with the smallest amount I could do for a bluff to save the money. And also if I did have a king or a set or something, I'd want to string him along for the ride, so I like betting very small. Given that he called the flop, though, I think my pair of 9s is no good, and I'm going to just have to let the hand go. I guess him not moving all in before the flop saved me money, because it looks like we were flipping and that we would have lost the flip. Anyway, not a big deal there. Can't win every pot. Checking the flop is also an option, but I don't really think the hand's good enough to check call, given that we only beat like hands like ace-queen. So I think betting there to try to get him off a hand like 2 10s maybe is the way to go, given that there's quite a bit of money in the middle and it's worth trying to pick up that pot rather than trying to bluff catch. Okay. I don't know anything about this player yet, and when you don't have a good reason not to c-bet, you might as well c-bet. I could definitely get him to fold some better hands there. Better queens, ace highs, king highs, maybe a pair of 2s or 3s. So that's why I like to bet there. My hand's also not good enough to call any bets, so for that reason I prefer betting to checking and calling. Here with the jack, I'm definitely betting for value. I expect him to call with all his pocket pairs at least once. Flush draws, which were ahead of worse jacks, and will occasionally get called by the better jacks, will get called by a deuce, but for the most part, we have the best hand there, so betting is the correct play. King 6 suited, if folded to, definitely going to open. This is a hand that can flop pretty well. Second nut flush draw is very strong. Hitting a pair of kings is always good. And in these games where people aren't really 3-betting very aggressively, you can get away with opening a pretty wide range in the cutoff position. So here, I don't need to bet too big. He's either calling or he's not. If he has a pair, he's calling. If he has a queen, he's calling. If he has anything else, he's probably folding. So don't need to bet too big to make him fold. Again, we're giving ourselves the best odds on our bluff for the times we are bluffing. And when we flop a very nutted hand, we're kind of tempting him into the pot. The 10-8 suited that I folded under the gun, I don't have as much high card value in terms of flopping top pair. I'm going to be flopping second pair a lot more often and stuff. And I also, my flush draw isn't as big, so although you're not going to get into flush over flush situations that often, you do want to do what you can to be proactive about putting yourself in a position where you're more likely to have the bigger flush rather than the smaller flush, because in a flush over flush confrontation, you are either drawing dead or you have 100% equity. So you really want to try to minimize the situations you can put yourself in where you're going to find yourself with a smaller flush or flush draw versus being the guy who's holding the nut or second nut flush or flush draw. Also, being under the gun, you got a few more players to go through, and generally speaking, there's not really all that much merit to opening a wide range under the gun. If you want to be opening wide, you should be doing it in position, that being the button and the cutoff, under the gun, and in a 6-max game, under the gun and under the gun +1 should generally just be positions where you just play a tight range and yeah, hope to run into some weak players who ignore the fact that you're playing a tight range under the gun and make bad calls and put themselves in tough positions. Remember, position is of the utmost importance in poker, and when you are under the gun, you are almost definitely out of position. If you get called, it's often going to be in position by either the cutoff or the button, whereas when you raise on the button, if you get called, it's going to be by someone out of position, and you are going to have position for the duration of the hand. So we see Fend a Game is really liking that all-in play, but he is holding the nuts, so a nice hand there. And we'll take a look at how that played out, see if there's anything interesting to note. So he opened, pretty standard, got 3-bet by ace king in the blinds, pretty standard, called, nothing wrong with that. 4-betting the 10s there against most players is not a good idea, because if you do get played back at with a 5-bet, it's very unlikely your opponent's going to be holding a worse pair than you, so you're either flipping or you're completely crushed. Just quick side note, this player is very aggressive in the small blind, and given that he's going to have position and he's going to be a tough guy to play against, it's okay to just let those guys have your small blind. You pick on the weak players when they're in the big blind and you're in the small blind, and when you're up against a strong opponent, it's okay to just give them respect. This guy might be a little steaming right now, so that's why I'm going to 3-bet with this hand. Anyway, back to that 10s hand. On the flop, the guy c-bet with his gut shot, which is okay. Jack 10-9 is a pretty bad board for ace-king, especially in a 3-bet pot, because the hands that people call your 3-bet with are generally 9s, 10s, jacks, ace-queen, ace-jack suited, king-queen suited. basically a lot of hands that just crush a Jack 10-9 flop. So check folding might be a better option, or check calling once because you're ahead of ace queen and then giving up to further action. Against guys who will call your 3-bet with anything, I guess betting there is okay as a semi-bluff, but once he gets raised 30 more, calling is just really bad. Based on implied odds, he needs to expect to win about 300 to call 30 with a gutter. And if his gut shot comes in, it's going to be very obvious, and his opponent is going to shut down unless he's holding a king, like a queen king or a jack king type hand. So it's very unlikely he's going to get paid. That's the main reason it's not really a great call. He doesn't have the immediate odds to call, and his implied odds aren't really there because his draw is so obvious. So even though it's a really cheap raise he's facing, calling, playing out of position against someone who probably almost definitely has a better hand than you, with a lot of money behind, just generally isn't a good idea. And then on the turn, he compounded his mistake by check calling off the rest, unimproved. And that's the thing, when you call a small raise, it's easy to get sucked in and feel committed to the pot, which is why it's very important to make your decisions early in the hand, whether or not you want to get in and be involved, or if you want to get out. Okay, this is a really awkward spot because I don't know anything about this player. For the sake of education, I'm going to call with the ace-queen suited. But generally speaking, in most games, medium stakes, when you raise under the gun and you get re-raised by the big blind, the guy is not bluffing, which means his range is probably something like queens, kings, aces, and ace-king. And let's get real here. Ace-queen suited against that range of hands is looking pretty bad. And we're actually coolering ourselves a lot. If we flop a pair, we're still often going to be out-kicked or looking at a bigger pair. So you really want to respect the positions when looking at 3-bets and whether or not you want to defend 4-bet or call or anything. In those positions, even though ace-queen suited is a really pretty hand, I think you just need to respect the re-raiser and fold. On the other hand, if he's been re-raising like a lot, and you've seen him show down hands like king 10, 10-9, ace, jack, and he's pretty much 3-betting recklessly regardless of position. In those cases, ace-queen suited now becomes a monster, and you can definitely defend that to a re-raise, especially suited. But against most normal players, ace-queen suited can definitely be folded there, facing that 3-bet, and you will save yourself a lot of headache by, not only getting upset all those times you missed the flop, but more so, interesting, I've only seen this guy 4-bet once, and he had ace-king, so I think he's probably playing a reasonably tight game. I'm just going to let him have it. But yeah, you'll save yourself a lot of headaches by avoiding those times where you flop an ace and it's no good, and since it's a 3-bet pot, you don't have much choice but to get your whole stack in there, and now you're getting rocked for 100 big blinds when you could have easily just folded and gotten out for 3 big blinds and avoided what is potentially a bad situation. Okay, it's going to say this queen 9 suited is definitely not getting folded, but it looks like it will be getting mucked. And given that this player gave us a walk and the small blind, that's even more reason to believe that he's playing a little bit on the tighter side, and that he most definitely had a hand that smashed the hell out of ace-queen suited there. Wallachus, I haven't really seen do anything, so I'm just going to mix it up and get in there. There's definitely nothing wrong with taking the strategy of hammering on a player until they start fighting back. if someone's going to let you steal their blind every time, then you might as well raise anything that looks good, anything that has some flopability, some playability. It's only when you see someone likes to call your raises, float you post-flop, bluff raise you, or 3-bet you pre-flop that you need to say, okay, I'm going to slow down, I'm going to take a step back, and I'm only going to be raising hands that I'm comfortable playing flops, turns, and rivers with, because there's a good chance that we're going to get to that point against this type of player who likes to play back. And just a quick note about the nines earlier, the blind versus blind. Once I 4-bet the hand, I'm never folding it. Pretty much any time you 4-bet with a hand that you are doing it because you think it's probably the best hand, you have to call off to the 5-bet shove, because you already have, a quarter to a third of your stack in there, and that means, there's going to be 50 big blinds of dead money in there. So you're effectively calling 150 to win 225 big blinds. And the odds of that are, it's pretty good. You need 40%, and against a full spectrum of hands, you'll usually have 40% if you have a hand that you thought was the best hand. I mean, even if, say, I ran into jacks that particular time, so long as he's got ace king in that range of, say, jacks, queens, kings, aces, tens, and ace king, he's going to have ace king about twice as often as he'll have a pocket pair. So we'll be 50-50 half the time, and 80-20 half the time. And I think if we balance those out, we're getting around 40% equity. And that doesn't even include the times that he was 3-bet bluffing and is going to fold to our 4-bet. The hands you can 4-bet as a bluff if you think someone's, really getting out of line. And in those cases, you don't have to call off. 4-betting as a bluff would be something like ace X or queen jack, or a random king 3 suited. With hands that weak, it's okay to fold to the 5-bet. But if you 4-bet anything with the likes of a pair, ace queen, ace jack, king queen, it's pretty criminal to go ahead and fold the hand after having 4-bet. Again, this guy's probably pretty strong. The raise is coming from under the gun, and he's 3-betting from under the gun +1. So those are both very strong ranges. And some added fact is the guy who's raising is short stacked, so there's not a lot of room to outplay him post flop. So when this guy 3-bets to 16, he's pretty much saying I'm ready to play for $100 against an under the gun raise, which means he probably has a very strong hand. That is one spot where you can think about maybe throwing ace king in the muck, especially at 100 big blinds or deeper, possibly jacks, possibly queens. It gets very close with queens. But in a spot where you're looking at a very strong raise, like a raiser's range of under the gun from a tight player, and then a re-raise from the next narrowest range position of the cutoff, you're looking at two really strong hands, and even hands like ace king and queens don't necessarily do too strong against those hands where you're looking at, like, well, the second guy probably has aces or kings if he's not 3-betting as a bluff very often, if ever. And again, that's just one of those spots where you can save a lot of headache by quote-unquote dodging a cooler. Everyone thinks, well, I have ace king in a shorthanded game. It's standard to get it in. And in most situations, yeah, it's definitely true. I mean, putting 100 big blinds in with ace king can't be a big mistake. But when you're looking at two extremely strong ranges where it's not likely there are like any bluffs in there or anything, suddenly King's not looking so good, and you're going to find yourself against the same hand in the best case scenario, and often looking at a hand that has you pretty dead. Pocket Kings, on the other hand, it's pretty much never a fold in no limit hold'em shorthanded. So if he's got aces, I mean, nice hand, but we're definitely getting the money in there. But you saw, even though he 4-bet extremely small, just like double my raise, he cannot fold if I put more money in when he 4-bets, especially with that hand. And the bigger you 4-bet, the better odds you will be getting when you get shoved on. And the smaller you 4-bet, the worse odds you will be getting, of course. Okay, this guy's a new player. He's a short stack. I'm going to assume he's bad. So I'm actually going to assume that he's not 3-betting only a tight range. I think, he's going to be 3-betting anything that looks good. King Jack, King 10, Ace 10, Ace Queen, any pair. So my plan pretty much here is to call, and if I flop top pair, I'm not folding the hand, because I think I'm going to have him beat a lot. I think he's just going to bluff off his stack a lot. These short stack players, actually I'm going to check that one, don't really slow down, and they just whip the whole stack in whatever they got. So I was hoping to flop top pair and get the money in there, and occasionally be beat, but most of the time be good. And wow, this might be a value raise, because I don't think he's playing any 3s. So unless he has a set of 5s or slow played aces, we're good here. I just don't think he's calling my raise with a hand that has a 3 in it. So given that, I gotta think I might have sucked out on a better queen, but that the queen 10 is good there. And that's a very important thing about narrowing people's hand ranges. That helps you decide when you should be afraid of certain cards that come off, and when you can just ignore them completely. But anyway, that little situation that happened with the strong ranges for 3-betting and suddenly a weak range for 3-betting shows you that poker is extremely situational, and what might be the best play in one situation is far from the best play in another situation that like at first glance may seem very similar, has a lot of very different intricacies to it. And all the information must be evaluated in poker. You need to evaluate your position, the position of where the action's coming from, the type of player who is making the play, how he's doing lately. Is he winning? Is he stuck? Is he really tilted? He's lost like 4 buy-ins and a couple on bad beats. Now he's just going crazy, playing different than usual. Is he just like being a total rock as always? You gotta try to be in tune to where people's emotions are in this game, because you're not playing against robots. You're playing against real people, and these people have emotions, and it's up to you to try to get a feel for their emotions and their emotional state. This can only, of course, be done through observation. The A7 is probably the best hand, but I think he's just going to call my raise anyway, and my hand's not that connected. Like Ace 10 I definitely raise, but Ace 7, like, they just don't work well together. So since he's going to call anyway, and he's not going to fold when he hits any pair, any draw, I think I'm better off just keeping the pot small, hoping that I'd hit something, rather than just building a big pot out of position, because again, position is very important. But yeah, all these things can only be determined with observation, and it's your job to pay attention to what's going on, make notes, gather as much information as you can, and then try to make the best decisions you can based on the information available. And there is a lot more information available in this game than your cards and your opponent's poker tracker or hold'em manager stats. There is a lot of stuff going on that you can pick up on. Comes with experience. I guess a good thing for me to do for you guys would be to make a list of all of the places you can get information that you probably aren't thinking about, and the little nuances that make every situation different, that will allow you to play each hand in a better way. Um, yeah, there's almost always a perfect play you can make anytime the action's on you, whether it be fold, call, bet, or raise, and to what amount. And the more often you can come close to making the perfect play, the more you're going to win in the long run. Because we all know the luck balance is out, and whoever's playing better at the end of the extended period of, we'll say, probably a month is a good sample, or 100,000 hands, your luck should be about even. If you've been playing better than your opponents and making fewer mistakes than your opponents, you will make more money than your opponents, or you will be the one winning money while your opponents are losing. A lot of people who think that internet poker is rigged, for one, play a way too small sample, where, if they've played 20 sit and goes, 30 sit and goes, a lot of random stuff can happen in 20, 30 sit and goes that could seem kind of crazy. Whereas if they play 3,000 sit and goes, they're going to see that, oh, well, these crazy beats that happened in the first couple were just kind of flukes, and over the next 400 or 500 sit and goes, I only saw a super suck out happen, one time. Obviously, coolers are going to happen, and the more hands you're playing, the more coolers you're going to see. But by playing disciplined pre-flop, you can avoid a lot of situations where you're going to get coolered. Like, if you call a raise with 3-4 suited, and the flop comes 5-6-7, yeah, you're going to run it, and if you get all the money in, yeah, you're going to run into 8-9 a lot. Or if you flop a flush with 3-4 suited and you get all the money in, of course you're going to get it in against a bigger flush a lot of the time, because people aren't just going to be like, wow, I have top pair, I'm going to get it in, even though there's 3 diamonds on the board. People are a little smarter than that. Or they might say, well, I have 2 pair. So, they'll put some money in, but if someone's willing to go all in with you, and there's a very obvious potential made hand out there, like a straight or a flush, odds are your opponent's gonna have it if he's willing to go with it. Ooh, well, I know nothing about this player. I could have the best hand, but even if I do, even if he has something like a gut shot or a 5, he has 5 to 10. If he has a flush draw, he could have 15 outs. Even if he only has 2 overcards, he has 6 outs. So whatever he has a lot of equity versus my pair of 7s. And I'm also going to have to face bets on future streets. It's not just the 11 there. I'm probably looking at his whole stack by the river. Okay, I believe this guy's a donkey. So I'm just going to re-raise and have no problem just going all in with him. He seems to be playing a lot of hands, so... he could have a bigger pair, but I also think he's going to do this with 7s, 8s, or 9s, or ace, jacks, pretty thin. Given that I re-raised from such a strong position, 10s is the worst hand I'm going to have, and in terms of unpaired cards, I'm going to have ace, queen, and ace, king. So for him to get it in there is pretty bad, but hey, that's why he is a quote-unquote bad player. And it was my job to identify that. Against a good player, if I had 3-bet the 10s there, and he 4-bet me all in, I'd probably have to fold, because now he's going to have queens, kings, aces, and ace-king. I'm not looking so good against that range. Whereas against the weak player, I think getting in 10s there is completely fine and completely standard, because we're flipping a lot more than we are against the regular, and I think we also have him beat some of the time. This is very close, but I think I'm going to let him have it. I'm out of position, If he's raising every ace on the button, I should call because I'm ahead of like more than half his aces, but I'm just not sure with this guy. He might be the kind of guy who only raises like ace 7 and better, so while I'm beating 2 aces, I'm dominated by the rest. I'm going to have to play the whole pot out of position. Don't really have a lot of good information. It's tough to gather information out of position. So rather than get myself into a sticky spot against a good player who's going to have position, I just, let it go, lose my big blind, no big deal, and focus on playing spots where I have a much bigger edge or whatever. Okay, I can like make him fold like missed clubs. I doubt he's folding very often, but I'm gonna just do it for shits. I mean, he's got a queen a lot that he's calling. He's got a jack he's calling sometimes. Or, very good player is gonna call with pair on the river. I felt like he would bet the flop with a straight draw or diamonds, so those were knocked out of his range. So even though the 8 of diamonds came that also filled the straight, I don't think he's ever going to have a 9-10 or a diamond flush there. So in that sense, the bet was okay, because it's kind of like scary. And given that he checked back on the flop and called the turn, he could either have clubs that he picked up on the turn, or a queen with a weak kicker, or even a good kicker that he's checking back saying he doesn't want to get check raised, but he's not folding the hand. He definitely wants to play it for a showdown. Or, a hand like King Jack that will definitely call the turn because I'm bluffing a bunch, and then on the river make a decision whether he's good or not. Against these players that are very good hand readers, that's why I have them with a red dot, you don't want to make bluffs where you're not representing a lot of hands. And the problem for me there is, if I had diamonds in my hand, I probably would have bet the flop. So when that third diamond comes in, he can kind of do the same thing I did and discount a flush from my range. And for me to bet there, especially so large, I mean, I should have a flush. And given that I can have a flush, and the only real hand I would be betting is a flush, he says, well, okay, then a pair is good, because I'm not going to bet there with a queen, because I'm going to be afraid of the flush. I'd rather just check and call. Or if I bet, I'm going to bet smaller. Same with a jack. So we can kind of say, okay, the only real hand that this guy could be betting this big with is a flush. And given that he checked on the flop, I think it's next to impossible for him to have a flush. Therefore, any pair is good. He probably has absolutely nothing. I call. And that is what we call in poker a nuts or air situation. When I'm betting there, and it's very few hands I can have that make sense because I didn't bet the flop and I bet the turn and river. I either have the absolute nuts or I have complete air. And, well, it's hard to make the nuts, and it's easy to have nothing. I don't think he's folding an ace here, so cool. Fired one. I win the flop. I win the pot if he has nothing on the flop, but then I don't waste any more money because I don't think he's folding. If I bet turn and river, I might have been able to make him fold, but when I check back the turn and bet the river, he's just not going to believe me, and he's going to say, oh, it's only $20 to see what he's got. Okay, I'm going to call. But yeah, it's a lot easier to have nothing. There are a lot more hands that make nothing than hands that make the nuts. So, given that, I like his call. It's $30 to win $60. So 2 to 1. He only needs to be right 1 time out of 3. And I would have bet the flop with the diamonds. So, given that, it's such a weird spot. Given that, I really like his call. Okay, I'm gonna guess that this guy has some hand with a jack in it, but I'm gonna put the pressure on, represent the big pair, and hope that I can make him fold his jack. He called the flop really fast, which I think means like a good but not a super great hand, and I'm representing a super great hand there, being aces or kings. So, not easy for him to make the call there. Whereas on the other hands, where I like check the flop or check the turn, I'm not representing so many super strong hands anymore. When you want to do a bluff, you have to make sure that your story makes sense and that your betting line is consistent with what you would do with a good hand. Um, if you're just bluffing in spots that it just makes no sense that you could have anything good, of course people are going to make hero calls on you with ace high and stuff like third pair because it's just it's easy to spot a bluffer a lot of the time to an experienced player. So don't be shocked when people make big calls on you. They probably have very good reason for doing it, and it's probably that you just didn't sell your story right. And you gave them the information they needed to make the call. I guess I'll go for about 5 more minutes. I'm actually very happy with how this recording has gone. Covered a lot more concepts than I thought I would in such a short time period, and especially playing only 2 tables. I think a big factor of that is the fact that I've been playing fairly loose, mostly in spots where it makes sense to, but I've been playing fairly loose, and rather than doing like 4 tabling where I'm just trying to take all the best spots. In this video, I've pretty much been taking every spot that I think has like a little bit of value to it. By the way, the king 10, if you're up against like a donkey, it's a really bad spot to bluff because donkeys don't fold. When you're running a bluff where you're trying to get your opponent to fold a pretty decent hand, you have to know that they're a thinking player who's capable of, figuring out what you have and then in turn folding what they believe is the second best hand. Again, here's these really strong positions. Like, I would definitely fold, especially with this being a regular, I would definitely fold king queen. I would almost always fold ace queen. And with jacks and tens, it's really close. You could call to set mine. You could call and call one bet on flops where you think they're going to continuation bet their ace king type hands. But if you call multiple bets with jacks or tens there, you're probably going to find out that you're beat by the end. So there's nothing wrong with being prudent and just folding it pre-flop, avoiding a sticky situation where really most of the time you are in bad shape. So even though it looks like you have a good hand, I mean, this is online poker. You get like a hand, like 10 hands every like 2 seconds. So just because you have jacks now doesn't mean you're not going to have jacks again in like 3 minutes. So you can play your jacks in the spots where jacks are way likely to be the best hand and not worry about the times where your jacks are probably in pretty bad shape. It'll really help your win rate. It'll really help like with not tilting because you won't be getting stacked as often as you used to if you're capable of making those disciplined laydowns early in the hand before you commit money. Even if you're like calling the flop and then folding, or calling the flop and turning them folding, you're just burning more money because at the end of the hand you're still folding. And if you fold your hand, you can't win. So if you're going to fold it anyway at some point, why not just fold it on the pre-flop where you have the minimum invested? You feel the least committed to the pot, the least upset about folding because you're losing so little. And just makes things a lot easier, especially when you're just like coming up. If you're trying to learn the game and try to work your way up the limits, don't try to play spots where the variance is really high. Focus on the spots where you're a big favorite. You know you have an edge. You know you're making money in some spots, and just stick with those. When it comes to the tough spots, wait till you've had a nice run. You're up 20, 30 buy-ins, and you're willing to like take a swing and be like, okay, well, if this guy grabs me on this hand, it's no big deal. It's only one stack, and I'm already up like 20 this month. Calling here because I don't know why he'd lead out. Like, he doesn't have a queen. He could have a 7. He could have like a small pair. So I'm actually just going to raise to try to get him to fold those things. If he has a flush draw, he might stuff it on me, but this size will be good. I'll have about a pot size bet left on the river, and I think he like never has a queen. So unless he's so stubborn that he can't fold a 7 by the end, I'm going to win that pot, and even if he calls there, I'm going to win a bigger pot on the river because he's just not calling. But yeah, if you want to start taking high variance spots, make sure you're prepared to handle the swing. If you're playing on a short roll, or you really hate to lose pots, and it's really important that you win as many pots as you can, don't get involved in the close spots. Just stick to the spots where you're a big favorite. If you want to start learning about these tougher spots, you have two options. You could either move down a couple limits where the money doesn't matter, and play those spots as they come up and see how it goes, and make a learning experience out of it. Or just wait till you're running hot and hope that when these spots do come up, that even if you are behind, you'll just flop sats and grab people. That strategy is a little more difficult to execute, but it's a lot more fun when it works. I promise you that. Of course, eventually you will have to know how to play in those spots. I'm just playing my hand for a bluff catcher. I don't really care about making him fold anything, and I mean, I'm definitely calling if he bets. He could bet like pockets. He could bet like king high. He could bet a seven. Or he could slow play his ace nine and miss out on a lot of value, because I definitely would have called the turn. Maybe it's about the same amount of value anyway. But not a big deal. Yeah, when you get to the higher limits, you definitely need to know how to play in those spots. Okay, so even though this guy's probably tilted and gonna 3-bet maybe a wide range, a7 is just shit hand. Minimum I'd need here is like ace-jack, ace-10 suited. So, don't always need to defend. Yeah, at the higher limits, you will have to know how to play in those spots, but, I mean, for most players, if they're going to be pros, you're looking at 2-3 years before you're going to be playing in the games where you really need to know how to handle those situations. And, you can go either way. You can decide you want to know how to play the best in every spot right away, and you're going to take a lot of variance and a lot of swings. But if you're the kind of person who has a stomach for that, by all means, go for it. If you prefer to, win as often as you can and avoid variance, then just stick to the spots where you're the big favorite, and yeah, you'll have a much steadier climb up that way. It may not be as fast as the loose player who's willing to take every spot. I think I'm gonna call, because I don't think he's gonna bet a 9 on the river. So I think if he bets, he either somehow turned a king, has 5-6, or has nothing. 5-6 is the most likely, but 5-6 is just as likely as 8-10 and 8-6. So there's more combos of hands that are bluffing than hands that are value betting. Whatever. Yeah. So yeah, bluff hand. Cool. Betting the turn would have served no purpose there, because I would have made him fold his bluff, and I couldn't have gotten any value from it. But instead, I trapped him. So yeah, I mean, it's really personal preference, and for anyone who's interested in coaching, I myself am more of the risk-averse type of player, but my other coaches, a couple of them are, much more into doing as much gambling as possible and maximizing your edge in every possible opportunity. So definitely there are people out there from both walks of life that are very successful at this game. And whatever style you're looking for, there are definitely people who can help you with it if you're ready for that sort of training. In the meantime, we're just going to keep on pumping out more videos for you guys. Please give as much feedback as possible so we can make them the way you like them. I hope that this format was enjoyable. I think for me it was actually more enjoyable than the 4-tabling type of video. I'll be honest, I didn't really pick up many reads because I was too busy talking rather than paying attention. I basically made my reads based on screen name tells and stack size tells. If you want to know about that, my Poker 102 video called Playing the Player and Game Selecting covers that pretty in depth. Anyway, I hope you found this video educational and helpful. This has been Grips for Grips.com. Now you go out there and get stacking.